Hello there. So, we meet again. Thanks for clicking on this video. No need to be so stern, I suppose. I have a series on here called Stupidity Explored, and a friend pointed out that if you actually want to do something constructive with these videos, you might want to investigate intelligence as well. Obviously, there's less opportunity to be incredibly haughty, but it might be worth a shot. Well, the first person I thought of to explore was Vinay Gupta, somebody I see online everywhere. I don't know what he is. He's so accomplished across so many different fields, it's hard to pin down, but in general I'd say he comes up with concrete solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems, which is incredibly rare because a lot of our most intelligent people have built their reputation on simply identifying the world's most pressing problems in housing, problems in disaster management, in society, even down to things like mental health. Vinay actually focuses his energy on designing ways to improve these areas of life. I hope you'll stick around, for example, for our next installment, where we'll be finding out what the 30 years of meditation actually does to a person, because that is absolutely staggering. But first, I wanted to find out about what Vinay is most famous for. For non-technical people like me, we found him because he designed the hexayurt. So what is a hexayurt and how did it come about?
So the hexayurt started with some people asking me a question. So the first question was 1995.
Right.
I was on a place called The Farm in Tennessee, and somebody, I can't remember exactly who, I think it was probably Albert Bates of World Watch, said, Vinny, can you figure out how to make a Buckminster Fuller style geodesic dome house without any waste?
Right.
Because the typical approach for making domes has about 40% waste.
Yeah.
And because you've got, all these kind of strange geometric triangles to make the dome.
And a lot of cutting.
And a lot of cutting, right? They're all cut from 4x8 sheets.
And they're not right angles involved there, yeah.
So the first question was this question, could it make a low waste dome?
Yes, okay.
And, the farm was the biggest of the hippie communes in Tennessee. It was the first place I went in America. And it turns out that I couldn't crack it. I spent 6 months and it didn't get anywhere. 7 years later, the second question comes along, which is, Vinny, can you figure out how to make a refugee shelter that can be folded flat and put back on the trucks? So when the refugees go home, they take their shelters with them, and then you can stand up the shelter, and now they've got housing. 15 minutes later I had the hexayurt.
I just can't believe you've designed something that has zero waste and that I could put together, because there's nothing to it, isn't it? It's just am I right in thinking you get 12 sheets, cut half of them in half diagonally, and then stick it together?
Exactly.
It's a miracle.
Well, that's what I thought, right? So the actual design, 6 4x8 sheets on their sides, which form a shallow wall, and then the roof, as you say, you just cut 6 boards in half to make big triangles, and then you put the big triangles on the walls, and you have a shell hut. Right. Very simple.
Do you have one overarching goal, that you work towards across many different fields?
No, I developed the goals after I developed the hexayurt.
Right.
So up until the point where somebody said, hey, could you do this? I'd never been particularly interested in refugees. After I discovered that, okay, now we've got a design that could actually help, after that I felt kind of responsible.
Right, okay.
Right, it's like, oh, okay, now I can do something, and that kind of, the Spider-Man line, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, with a little bit of power comes a little bit of responsibility. So it was kind of like, well, okay, I can make the world's cheapest shed, but I'm not going to be able to turn this into a house without a lot of help and support.
Well, that's interesting, because you can certainly see how this would be useful in the kind of crises like, a refugee situation and a natural disaster. But can you see it working for, say, the British housing crisis for people living in London? Can it work in that context too?
Well, there are two British housing crises, right? There's the British housing crisis where we just don't have enough housing for people to have kids in, right? And there's the British housing crisis where we've got a whole bunch of homeless people. So I think that you could potentially house homeless people in the UK inside of I don't think you'd necessarily use a hexagon, but you'd use some kind of small house design. It might be a bit larger than a hexagon and a little more conventional, but you could do something that was incredibly cheap, right? Think of something that's like a kind of one-car garage with a built-in bathroom and a little kitchen, like a kind of studio apartment type thing. So I think a hexagon is a little basic for Britain, particularly given that we've got cold winters, but in a pinch, a kind of garage-style construction. You could make these things by the thousands.
Yeah.
You could tuck them away in strange little corners of disused patches of land, and if you made them so that you could move them, just lift it onto the back of a truck with a crane and then put it somewhere else, you could have a fleet of 50 or 100,000 of these things, and you could end homelessness.
Just a minute, Vinay. Are we really to believe that there are solutions to major problems and they're not being employed? If the hexagon, for example, is open source and anyone can use it and anyone can manufacture it, why aren't people making these things by the thousand?
People are building them all over the place, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of units. Can I get it into refugee camps yet? No. Terribly difficult, because the NGO bureaucracies are very slow to adapt. They don't really like it, it's too permanent, it's too cheap, it's too easy for people to build themselves without an NGO involved. They get very uncomfortable. How uncomfortable? We built one in Haiti, and it took 102 different agencies were contacted, 160 different individuals. It was sitting right in the middle of Port-au-Prince with an aid worker living in it, and not a single agency would come and visit it. I've had people from Geneva refuse to stand inside of one at a demonstration. They came, they looked at it, they would not set foot inside it.
The message here is don't let bureaucracy fool you into a false projection of what's possible. The world around us is constructed out of what the bureaucracy lets through, and what's possible is likely to be far more than we're led to believe. Another thing you notice in Vinay's work is that new approaches to solving existing problems may not look anything like the systems we've been employing up until now.
Is there something in the design that it's nearly circular? I mean, that makes the most efficient use of space, doesn't it? So it seems like conditions that we take to be normal, it makes you realise they are an invention, that everyone lives in a rectangle, that you know, in the future it might be hexagonal as the normal thing.
Rectangular houses are totally weird.
Why? Because they've got these weird corners that you can't fit things in?
I mean, all through human history, there wasn't a right angle, right? I mean, I don't know what the first rectangular dwelling was. There must be a point where there was the first rectangular dwelling occurs. But, that must have been a weird day. Can you imagine people walking into it like, your house is square. What's going on? Why is your house square?
There aren't many right angles in nature, particularly. Yeah. So why would they do that? Is it because it makes the best use of materials at the time?
It's got to be something to do with land. Right?
Okay.
It almost certainly, when you get right down to it, it'll be something to do with land. So if you have a straight line, which is the road, and you want to efficiently use the front edge against the road, maybe you wind up with a big straight flat wall, and once you've got that big flat wall, you're not going to build a bunch of little round houses.
Okay,
something like that. It'll be something to do with land use.
Right.
But it's certainly nothing to do with structure, because if you're just building a house in a field, a round house will cost you roughly half of what a square house of the same volume will cost you.
Right.
They're incredibly cheap in comparison.
Okay.
Right angles are really expensive.
So now that you have invented that and have gone on to work in Ethereum, and you write philosophical and innovative essays and do so many different things, is there now an overarching goal that you work towards?
Well, unfortunately, yes. So I invented the hexagon in 2002, right? The big turning point, the point where my life really turns around in just a stupid direction, I don't know, what the hell was I thinking, is I have an honest-to-God religious vision in 2001.
Right.
And, the whole thing is kind of sort of coming out of the Hindu perspective, right? I mean, I've been a long-term student of Hinduism, I was a heavy meditator. It's the only actual vision I've ever had. And the entire thing was basically in the style of Monty Python or possibly Douglas Adams. It was hilarious, right? And at the end of it, it was like, that was it? What the hell was that? But nonetheless, the entire course of my life changed direction. But I can't stress that, it's like, at the time, as I kind of came round from this thing, there was definitely this sense of like, I've gone mad. What the hell is that? And then afterwards, it was like, yeah, maybe. But it never lost that kind of comedic quality. But that launched me on this kind of span of working on all of these incredibly, incredibly serious things. And up until that had happened, I had no interest in any of that stuff. So, even though this thing had a very Douglas Adams quality, it turned out to be something that was immensely transformative. And there's kind of no way back now.
Can you tell us what it is, or was it something that you had to assimilate over time? Did you know immediately what it meant?
Oh no, it was communicated extremely clearly what it meant, right? So, section 1, it's an infinite airport.
Okay.
Right? The check-in desk is 100,000 booths wide, the queue is 100,000 years long, and it's the whole population of Earth being evacuated because the planet is dead. And the second part of the vision is a bunch of little kind of swami types who come up and say, Swami, Swami, Swami. It doesn't matter if all these people will die, everything which is born will die. It doesn't matter that the human race will die, everything which was born will die. Right? It doesn't matter that the planet will die, everything which was born will die. But if they all die right now, we have to do the paperwork, and we can't face 100,000 years of listening to people complain. So we're just going around asking, well, you see, right?
Nightmare.
So the entire thing was basically like, we're a bunch of lazy celestial bureaucrats who don't want to do the paperwork on rehousing the entire human race after they go extinct. Could you please do something so we don't have to do the paperwork? There was no sense of this being a serious situation. It was just a paperwork remediation exercise. And then a couple of days later, the whole force of the thing hit me, and off I went to the races. But there was that thing of just like, this is it? What the hell was that? And I have no explanation.
Well, there's a brilliant sort of honesty to it, isn't there? There's no...
But I mean, are we really to believe that there are celestial bureaucrats that will evacuate Earth?
It seems such a predominant feature of human life that maybe...
I mean, I think it's more reasonable to suggest that something in my unconscious mind had been coming to the conclusion that the world was in serious, trouble, and I needed to do something. And it was kind of like a slipping of tectonic plates causing an earthquake, that there was something which was just like a reorientation response.
Yeah.
I told you he was an interesting person. You can subscribe to Vinay's YouTube channel here and find out about blockchain and Ethereum on there if you haven't already. We'll cover that here as well. But next time, it's meditation and enlightenment. What does meditation do exactly? What is enlightenment? And where can you learn a practical way of achieving it yourself? And of course, please remember to vote for me when I inevitably enter these into the International Documentary Awards. I was thinking about the following categories: